public mental health. So very qualified for this topic he's about to talk about. And he's also a journalist of some sort. He has his own radio show. Without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Ayodele Ajayi. He's going to be talking about creating healthier families, children and young people's mental health. Dr. Ajayi, welcome to the Orientation Digital Conference 2020.
Thank, thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I do think it's also a great privilege. I also want to say thank you to Mrs. Tomide Johnson for putting this together, because I do think this is a very crucial need in our community. So thank you for meeting such a very vital need at this important period of our lives. So my theme today is to talk about creating healthier families, particularly to do with the mental health of young people and of children, our young people and children. Now, I think it's very important that we first understand what mental health is, and why it's very important at this time to look at the mental health of our young people. Now, somebody said, Aristotle, who was a Greek philosopher, he said, "Give me a boy until he's 7 years old, and I will give you back the man." The import of that is the very early years of a child's life are very, very crucial to what they become in life eventually. That includes the experiences they have, that includes their education, and that includes even the environment in which they grow up. So it's very important to pay attention to our children, and particularly to their mental health. But the reality is, what exactly is mental health? Because if a child goes on the playground and they break their leg and they have a fracture, we know they have a fracture on their legs. We know where that is. We know we can put a cast over that. If a child, for any reason, cuts themselves with the scissors, for instance, maybe they're doing their hard work, we know where that is. We know how to address that. But when it comes to mental health, it's usually a problem to put people find it difficult to put their hands on what exactly mental health is. So according to the World Health Organization, mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual is able to fulfill their potential. They are able to cope with the normal stresses of life. They are able to work productively, and they are able to contribute meaningfully to society. And so when there is a problem in that regard, then we can begin to suspect that maybe there is a problem with mental health. And the next question is, what are mental illnesses? Because if we know mental health, then when there's a deviation from it, then we know we can see what mental illnesses are. Mental illnesses are a set of conditions in which there is involvement of the thought, that the thinking is affected, emotions are affected sometimes, and also sometimes behavior is affected. So sometimes it's a combination of this, or it could just be one of them. What we do find is that when one is affected, when thinking is affected, for instance, eventually it affects the emotions, and it will eventually affect behavior. And the impact, it's not just about the fact that these domains of life are affected, it's also the impact that it has on the individual. So everybody sometimes gets a bad day. Sometimes you hear bad news. Maybe you went for an interview, you didn't get it. You feel sad about it, but you recover. By the next day or after a few days, you are well. You are back to form. But it becomes a problem when the problems in in emotions, problems in thinking, and problems in behavior actually affect a person's functioning, and such that they are not able to function well in their relationships, they are not able to function well in their family life, they are not able to function well in their jobs, or they might not even be able to function well in their education. When this happens, when there's an impact on these areas of life as a result of problems in thinking, in emotions, and behavior, then we talk about mental health problems. Now, the question is, why do we need to start talking about mental health problems in children? The reality is that over the last 30 years, research shows us that more and more, even though on the overall, the mental health of children and young people has been static, what we know is that over the last 30 years, it looks like more and more we are seeing more problems in young people and in young adults. Children and young people are beginning to get more affected by mental health problems, even though on the overall, we find that most children and most young adults still do well. Now, the WHO, for instance, tells us that worldwide, up to 10 to 20% of children have a mental health problem of some sort. Now, let's try and put that in perspective. What we are talking about here is that if you go into a playground in a school, or you actually go into a school assembly, we are talking about 1 out of 10 children that you count possibly having a mental health problem. 1 out of 10 children, or even 2 out of 10 children, because the World Health Organization figures says it's 10 to 20%. That's quite alarming. And why is that? It's because the world is changing. We know that children are under more pressure. They are exposed to social pressures. For instance, the internet is one of the reasons that has been cited. The fact that even sometimes maybe parents are not available as well, those are issues that could actually create mental health difficulties in our children and in our young people. So the question is, how do we deal with this? What can we do as families to help our children? What are the things that we can actually do to help children to have a good start in life, to help them to have a good grounding, so that they are starting off on a robust ground? The first thing I would like to refer to is that children, in order for children to thrive mentally, they do need unconditional love and acceptance. They need unconditional love and acceptance. And that unconditional love and acceptance can come from no better people than their primary caregivers. In most communities, is their parents. That could be their parents living together, or it could be one or a single parent family. But the important thing is that children should have acceptance and love that is unconditional. Sometimes in African families, sometimes in Afro-Caribbean families, we are too driven to, and we emphasize so much on outcomes for these children that their mental health becomes becomes put at risk as a result of the fact that the parents are driven. However, it's very important for children to be shown love in a way that they know that the love that a parent has for them is not based on outcomes. It's based on the fact that I love you anyway. It's not based on, and I'm not going to love you better because you've performed well, and I'm not going to love you less because you've failed in one area of your life or the other. So it's very important that children understand this from the outset, that they have unconditional love of their parents and of whoever is the primary caregiver. Sometimes it may be the grandparents or somebody else that is able to stand in this role and actually give this love and actually give this message to children, so that their mental health can be robust. The other thing that we need to know about giving unconditional love and acceptance to young children in order for their mental health to be robust is that we also know that affectionate touches, giving them hugs, giving them embraces is actually a very meaningful thing, and it's a very, very powerful thing in helping the brain of children develop and also their mental health to develop. There is so much research that has been done in this area, and every time the outcome is that indeed children who are embraced, children who have regular hugs, children who have affirmation from their parents actually do better mentally and they do better socially than children who don't. Now, what else do children need in order to develop well, to have a robust mental health as they go into their lives? Children need to also be enabled to understand their identity. I think there's no other time to talk about the identity of children than at this time, when we've got the George Floyd as a murder, as well as the Every Life Matters. everybody, Black Lives Matters rather. This is the time to really help children to understand that their life matters and that the color of their skin has nothing to do with what the value they've got to give to the world. So we as parents, we as caregivers, as mentors, as church leaders, as community leaders, need to reinforce this message to young people that their lives matter. And we need to help them to develop a sense of well-being, that no matter what their color is, where they were born, how they were born, that they are of value and their life brings, and that they are unique in themselves. And we need to also help them to understand that they shouldn't let another person's reality or another person's view of themselves become their own personal reality. They need to determine, and this is something that we do by encouraging young people, by helping them to find their strengths, by helping them to find the things that they do well, that they excel at, and also by reinforcing a message of encouragement. Young people and children are at a time in their lives when they are developing their view of themselves, the world, and others. And the parental voice is very important. I do know I'm beginning to round up now because I know I've got about a minute left. Now, it's also very important for us, for caregivers, to reinforce this message to young people that you believe in their dreams and that you believe in their future. And finally, I think it's important that if there are any signs of mental problems or any signs that show that maybe there is a deviation from the norm, it's very, very important for parents to seek help very promptly. We do know that early intervention in any mental condition is associated with a good outcome. And also for parents, one of the best things you can do for your children, particularly if you have a mental problem yourself, is to seek help. Because if you're not in a robust place to give support to your child, then you put that child more at risk of developing mental problems in the future. So I would like to, I'm sure that if there are any questions, I can then take that at the question time.
Yeah.
Once again, before having me on the
riveting presentation. I mean, I find that quite useful. I'm sure a lot of people will do as well. Before I let you go, as Africans, aren't we in a conundrum? Aren't we in a state of confusion? Because the things that you mentioned here, they are very ideal. But my observation with our community is, even culturally, there are things that I think we probably, or how many, African moms of their daughters, or vice versa. And then this issue of discipline, you alluded to something that in our community we're outcome driven. So in a situation where you want your son to be a doctor at all costs, and you spend so much money on private education, there was a video recently that went viral. A gentleman that beat his son because of his result that was so bad, and on social media, you see Africans in the UK, in the US, saying, yes, that's what that boy deserves, and some voices like mine were a minority to say, but what about his mental health? What about his emotion? I digress, but my son once said, Dad, do not live your life vicariously through me. I had to Google the word vicariously. I had to Google it. That boy had that resentment since he was 13. He eventually found his voice when he was 17. He said, Dad, I am not studying medicine. I want to study art. Please do not live your life vicariously through me. So I learned very quickly that sometimes we don't even have bad intentions, but our children can be going through a lot of pressure in terms of the pressure that we put on them. So before I digress too much, my question is, where does culture play in all of this? You will hear most African communities say, spare the rod, spoil the child, all this kind of stuff. People will quote Bible verses to justify their high-handedness in terms of enforcing discipline in their home. How do we navigate these murky waters?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, because it's a very relevant question, and you've brought up a lot of issues actually. One of them is the issue of discipline. What we do know, for instance, what we do know is that consistent discipline that is carried out with compassion, and discipline that is well communicated is what is effective. So there are three C words there. There's communication, there is compassion, and there's communication, there's compassion, and there's consistency. Now, the way to break that down is that it's important for children to know why you are applying discipline. It's important to communicate with them and to know what is in it for them. Secondly, it's important for you to do it from the point of compassion, not the point of anger. And lastly, it's also important for that to be consistent. Now, in terms of a child who doesn't want to study medicine, for instance, I know in Africa we all want our children to be doctors and lawyers, but it's very important for us as parents as well to look at their academic abilities, to look at their aptitudes, to look at their natural abilities, and to encourage them in that regard. Because the reality is that there are people, I have colleagues who are doctors and they're frustrated because they didn't really choose to become doctors. Their parents forced them to become doctors. And today they're carrying on living, they're going through the motions, but they're not enjoying life. So I think that's a very, very important thing, that it's our responsibility as parents to help children to discover who they really are in life, to help them to discover their natural abilities and then train them in that regard, and help them to actually fulfill their potential to the best.
Dr. Ajayi, thank you so much for that. I'm sure our viewers will have one or two questions for you later on. So please do sit tight, and I'll come back to you at some point. Thank you so much once again for that, Dr. Ajayi, consultant psychiatrist, right there. Now, my next guest also is going to be talking about something along this line. She's an NHS consultant, forensic psychiatrist, and an approved clinical forensic training program director for Health Education England, Kent, Surrey, and Sussex. Wow, she's quite busy. She's an accredited therapist in cognitive analytic therapy, and she's an honorary senior lecturer at the Christ Church University of Kent. So, ladies and gentlemen, you'll need a notepad and a pen, because we have a lecturer that's about to join us now, and you know when lecturers lecture, you have to write stuff down. So it's my pleasure at this point to invite Dr. Folashade Olajubu to the podium, and she'll be talking about managing the impact of COVID-19 on families. Dr. Olajubu, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to start by again thanking the conveners for inviting me today. And I also want to thank Dr. Ajayi for giving a very insightful presentation. And just to recap what Dr. Ajayi said, he explained to us what mental health is and the difference between mental health and mental illness. And then he highlighted the fact that 1 in 10 children or young people will suffer from mental health difficulties in their childhood and adolescence. And he then went on to educate us about some of the factors that are necessary to promote mental well-being and good mental health in young people. I'm going to speak follow on from that by speaking about managing the impact of COVID-19 on families. And I start off by asking a question and then trying to answer it. Why this discussion? Why at this time? I answer by saying the coronavirus pandemic has disrupted the life of every child in this country, and dare I say, every family, no matter what your color is. Although I know that tonight we're focusing on our own people in the diaspora. And it has provoked an unprecedented public health emergency, which has challenged our society, challenged the economy, and we've not seen anything like this since the World War II that ended in 1945. So again, I ask the question, why this discussion? The reason why I've been asked to speak today is to focus, as Jai said, about the significance of childhood adversity. So we clinicians understand that childhood adversity can have a long-term impact on the mental well-being and actually the progress of children. And there's something known as toxic stress or unlimited stress, and it has potentially permanent effects and can be very damaging, and it can affect in three main areas. So if we think about how stressful the COVID-19 scenario has been, for young children, it can impact on three main areas. One, learning. And in terms of learning, it can impact on their linguistic abilities and their social, emotional skills. Secondly, the stress of COVID-19 on families can impact adversely on the behavior of children, and about adaptive behavior versus maladaptive responses to future adversity. And by that, I'm bringing in the concept known as resilience. And resilience is a simple word which means ability to bounce back from adverse circumstances. When children experience adversity at a young age, may impact ability to bounce back from adversity in later life. And then we understand that in terms of chronic stress at a young age, in addition to affecting learning and behavior, it can affect us physiologically. And it can bring us in the body, which is known as hyperarousal. Now, many of us would have heard of the fight, flight, fright mechanism. And to give an example, if I'm driving in my car and it cuts in front of me, that mechanism is activated, allows me to put my feet on the brakes and avoid having an accident. That's good. Likewise, preparing for tonight, that mechanism has a game and research and get prepared. All very good. However, of hypervigilance all the time, it can have a negative impact on both your mental health and your physical health, and predispose you in later life to mental health difficulties and physical health difficulties such as high blood pressure and diabetes. So essentially what I'm saying is that childhood adversity can have a lifelong effect on the life of the person who experiences it. So bringing that back into today, what possibly the impacts of COVID-19 on families? One, for many families, there's been a change in family routine, either with parents working from home or parents not being able to work at all. For many parents with child-aged children, there is an expectation that they take on the role of teachers and start supporting homeschooling, which can be very difficult. For many families, from our background, there are financial challenges and hardship due to the inability to work or working part-time or being furloughed. This, in addition, could lead to tension between the parents in the home. We mustn't forget that as Black and ethnic minorities, the prognosis when we catch COVID is worse. And so for many of us, we've had to contend with friends and close loved ones either contracting COVID or actually dying from COVID. For some of us, we have needed to shield. I know of an individual who has not been able to leave home for 12 weeks because he has serious underlying health conditions. Some of us have to self-isolate. I know that now have to live in a separate home. My husband is working, and yet the wife has to. And of course, all of these things lead to a worsening of mental well-being for the children and the adults. Sometimes in response to this, what you find is individuals will resort to substance abuse, drinking too much or taking, or could be an increase in domestic abuse. It's important to say that there are particular individuals or families who will be even more affected. So those who have a tendency to isolation because they're separate at school, the children may feel worry, anxiety. There may be genuine fear of dying, fear of a relative dying, fear of treatment, and they may actually develop mental illness as described by Dr. Ajayi. And again, sadly, as I've said before, some young people will be exposed to domestic abuse, exploitation, and maybe neglect. So what are the strategies that we need to employ? Well, I'm speaking out now to the government that there are some strategies that need to be employed. They need to put strategies in place to control insecurity as a result of this crisis and preventing child poverty, because we know that child poverty is implicated in longer term mental health difficulties. Make sure that they have systems in place to respond to every child, whether their family of immigration status or not. They need to put strategies in place to keep children and young adults safe. The Life report, which is undertaken by the Children's Society, said that children and young adults are normally concerned about the following factors. And we, as individuals in our community, need to think about these factors as well. Young people and children are worried about their home circumstances, their family, their friends, their physical and mental health, issues around money, their future. And so we as families and parents, we need to think about those factors when we are supporting our young people. So what can family and parents do to support our young people? They can usher to the day. They can support the young people and children to engage in creative activities. They should support the children to engage in regular exercise. As Dr. Ajayi said, but also balance that with discipline, which is consistent and underpinned by good communication. They should be deliberate in giving their children individual attention. They should be open in their explanations. If somebody's going through financial difficulties or a loved one is well, they should provide explanations which are age appropriate. And if deemed appropriate, I know it's a taboo in our families and our backgrounds, but sometimes as parents, and for the sake of our children and our young ones and their longer term physical and mental health, we need to feel, or we should, access support. In terms for, again, just looking at specific strategies to help children mentally well, in addition to the things that Dr. Ajayi has said, we need to help children to remain connected to their peers. We need to support them to keep learning. We need to support them to keep active, to keep creative. And I think for adults and children, we need to take time to understand our identity. And the final thing that may not be popular in the indigenous population, but very important for us, is exercising our faith, whether we be Christians or Muslims. A faith, an active faith, helps us to weather the storms of life. I just want to helplines that might be necessary. If today you feel that you're family and they might be struggling in terms of mental health or struggling around, there are a number of helplines which are available. I, of course, start off with Climax. As you've heard Mrs. Tommy Day Johnson speak about the service they provide, and their contact number is 0757 53 24839. Of course, never forget that in extreme situations, one can contact the police, dialing 999, which is a free phone available 24 hours a day. There is a domestic violence helpline, which is also run by Women's Aid and Refuge, 82000-247. There is a particular aspect of the Metropolitan Police, which is for abuse for people within our culture, and the helpline is 020716128. For men, if you think that you are struggling, and I know men find it very difficult to reach out, there is a confidential helpline, 0808-801-037. And the Samaritans is a good helpline for anybody, regardless of in ethnicity. And the helpline is 08457 909090. In summary, what I'm saying is that COVID is a lot of stress on both the adults and the children within a family, that this can impact on both the mental health, both in the short term and in the long term. And again, regarding children, we need to encourage them to connect with others and ourselves, enable them to keep learning, be observant and take notice if they're struggling, encourage them to remain active, help them to be creative, them to practice their faith, and help them. Thank you very much.
So, Folashade, thank you so much for that. Very exhaustive and very a lot of information there to take away. But before you go, I want to talk about domestic abuse, if you don't mind, just to shed some light further. Now, with most people, when you hear domestic abuse, you are thinking about the punching or the belt or the elbow or the physical attack. In a situation that we're in right now, where children are locked up at home, either because of quarantine or because of the fact that we are all not allowed to go out as much, at least in the last couple of weeks, and couple, especially within our community, who usually don't spend that much time together, either because the husband has gone to do his work at night and the wife has gone to do her work in the morning, and then they have this window of hours where they spend together, and they've been doing that for like 2 decades. And all of a sudden, it's faced 24 hours, 7 days a week. Now, back to my question of domestic abuse. How damaging or how dangerous is the aspect of domestic abuse that's not physical, like verbal abuse, like neglect, like emotional abuse, like psychological abuse? Those bits that you don't necessarily have to physically beat your kids, but when you shout or you raise your voice or you chastise or you say, "Get out of my face, get out of my side, idiot," those kind of things that often happen. I mean, I won't speculate about other community, but I know it's quite rampant in our community. And as long as I'm not beating my son, as long as I've not punched him, as long as I've not slapped my, but I've called that idiot like 1,001 times, how damaging are these things? I'm alluding to the things that Dr. Ajayi mentioned earlier about the fact that these things can just break, and you really couldn't tell that you hurt somebody deep into their brain because you continue to call them idiots.
So much for that question. It's a very important question. Sadly, we know that the domestic abuse have increased since the lockdown due to the COVID pandemic, and it's for all the reasons that you so eloquently expressed. The fact that people and families, parents are spending more time together, and also highlighted in terms of financial challenges, a different structure to life, fear, illness. So it's like a melting pot. And I think you have eloquently described the different forms of domestic